Welcome to the Island Treasures mini podcast for caregivers. I'm your host and certified caregiving consultant, Allison Van Schie of Alongside Caregiver Consulting. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Cabin Teely Contractors in the Comox Valley, where we care too. Telling the full story of caregiving shines a bright light on many aspects of caregiving. But before I continue, I want to share a familiar quote with you by Rosalyn Carter. There are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who currently are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need a caregiver. Based on this quote, we all fall into one of the categories. And that is why this conversation and exploration into caregiving is so important. As my podcast guest, Dave Iverson, suggested, we have to pull up the blinds on what is before us in caregiving. Starting at the individual level, what do we see? Perhaps we see caregivers who are stepping up and stepping into the role of caring for a loved one, an elderly mother or father, spouse, neighbor, sibling, or friend. Perhaps we think that they're holding it all together, but are they really? What's their full story? Do they need help? Do they need support, resources, encouragement, respite? Or do they simply need a cheeseburger? One thing for sure, they need to feel that they're not alone. With caregivers who are no longer actively caregiving, many take the time to reflect on their caregiving experience. And as they look back, they process their thoughts, review their experiences, glean lessons from those experiences, review the emotions they felt. And they may take the opportunity through written or spoken word to share their full story of caregiving. Sharing their stories is vital, as it helps us to learn more about caregiving through personal stories and resources that have been tried and proven helpful. And it helps them to grow from their experience. Now, what about the broader level of caregiving? Do we see the inequities that Dave spoke about? What are those inequities? Dave spoke about the great supports his mother's paid caregivers were. They were highly skilled women from other countries. He was able to pay them well, but not all family caregivers have financial resources and have to find publicly funded supports. They have to figure out the supports that we are eligible for, how to access them, and how to best advocate for ourselves and our care recipients. Financial resources are measurable, and they are seen. You either have enough to pay for services and supports, or you don't. But what about the costs of caregiving that are unseen and immeasurable? Costs to caregiver well-being. Their physical, emotional, social, mental, and spiritual costs. How do we address these so that caregivers feel supported and not alone? Our conversations need to continue. I feel we are only raising the blinds a little bit on what's before us in caregiving in this mini episode. So I invite you to listen to the full episode called Telling the Full Story of Caregiving with Dave Iverson, and consider the aspects that Dave speaks about, as we need to make sure that supports and resources are available for all caregivers. If you find yourself in the midst of your own caregiving journey and do need some supports, I invite you to tap into alongsidecaregiverconsulting.ca. And thanks to Dave Iverson for sharing your story, your wisdom, and your insights. Take care.